Welcome to Broken Hearts of Reddit. This is the story of how $230 million fell into my lap, and with it, betrayal, cold threats, and a conspiracy by those closest to me to take not only my fortune, but the most valuable things I had. They calculated everything, except for one thing. Life itself turned the tables, and their moves backfired against them. I always thought our life was like an oil painting. My wife, Emily, our two children, Jack and Sophie. Each day was a brushstroke on that canvas. Mornings began with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the rustle of newspapers. Emily, in her silk robe, would gently kiss my temple, while the kids ran through the house, filling it with their laughter and stomping feet. We lived in a beautiful house in a quiet, cozy suburb of Boston. We weren't immensely wealthy, but I was a successful architect, and we could afford a lot. Our life was stable, predictable, and I thought, perfect. Emily was my rock, my best friend, my love. We had been together since college, been through so much, building our life brick by brick, and I believed she was my forever. Then, one ordinary Thursday, the phone rang. I was in my study, putting the finishing touches on a project, when a lawyer informed me of an inheritance. An old, long-forgotten uncle, whom I had only seen a couple of times as a child, had left me an astronomical sum, $230 million, a number that was impossible to comprehend. I didn't feel euphoria, but rather numbness. It took me a few minutes to realize it wasn't a joke. I had to tell Emily. I imagined how happy she would be, how we would make plans for the future, how we would make all our dreams come true. I cooked her favorite dinner, lit candles, and put on some good music. And when she walked into the room, I simply said, "Emily, I have some news for you." Her reaction was strange. First, shock, then confusion, and only then joy. But even then, something I couldn't quite understand flashed in her eyes. Something cold and calculating. I chalked it up to stress, to the unexpected news. But inside me, something quietly tightened, as if an invisible hand had squeezed my chest. From then on, our lives changed. Not immediately, not drastically, but little by little. I noticed that Emily became more withdrawn, more distracted. She could sit for hours, staring into space, or, conversely, be overly animated, laughing too loudly. Her movements became more nervous. I tried to talk to her, asking what was bothering her. She would say everything was fine. She was just tired, or that the changes were putting too much pressure on her. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But there were other moments that began to worry me. One day, I found a small, unfamiliar keychain among her things, engraved with, "For my Jason." When I asked what it was, she simply brushed it off, saying it was a gift for a friend, whose name, by the way, was Lisa. She had simply messed up the engraving. Naively, I believed her. Then there was an unfamiliar number on her phone, which she hastily deleted when I happened to glance at it. She said it was spam. I nodded. But all of this, like little grains of sand, settled inside, creating an invisible knot in my stomach. There was no clear evidence, no clues, just feelings that I tried to swat away like an annoying fly. I simply couldn't imagine that my Emily, my one and only, could be hiding something from me. And even more so, that this secret could be connected to the money. The inheritance, instead of bringing peace and joy, became a catalyst. My perception of reality began to slowly but surely warp. Emily's little quirks now seemed not like coincidences, but harbingers of something ominous. Every action, Every word I analyzed, trying to find a hidden meaning. I became obsessed. My sleep was disturbed. My appetite disappeared. I constantly felt this nagging ache in my chest, like a premonition of disaster. Emily started spending more time away from home. She explained it as preparing for charity galas, meeting friends, or going to yoga. But her explanations sounded less and less convincing. She started answering calls in another room, and sometimes I would hear her talking softly on the phone. And when I walked in, she would immediately hang up. When I asked who she was talking to, her answers were always vague. Oh, just work. Or, it's just an old acquaintance. Her voice would sound strained, and her eyes would dart around. One day, returning home earlier than usual, I found her in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, holding our family photo album. I smiled, thinking she was reminiscing. But when she looked up at me, I saw panic in her eyes. She quickly closed the album and set it aside. Is something wrong, my love? I asked. No, no, everything's fine. I just have a headache, she replied, getting up and heading to the kitchen. I walked over to the album. It was open to a page with our wedding photos. But that wasn't what caught my attention. Under the album lay a small golden chain with a heart pendant. I had never seen it before. When I asked where it came from, Emily quickly snatched it from my hands. Oh, that's just a gift for my sister. I forgot to give it to her, she said, clutching the chain to her chest. I thought she was trembling. Her words sounded unconvincing, and her reaction was too sharp. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. My suspicions grew when I noticed a change in her behavior towards the children. She used to always be with them, reading them bedtime stories, helping with homework. Now she began to distance herself. She could sit in her study for hours, working, as she would say, but all I heard was silence. Jack and Sophie seemed to notice it too. One day, Jack asked me, Daddy, why is Mommy so sad now? I didn't know what to say. I asked myself that very question every day. I started to follow her. It felt disgusting, but I couldn't do anything else. I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and I needed the truth, no matter how bitter it was. One day, I followed her to a shopping center. She went into a large department store, and I followed her from a distance. She wandered through the aisles for a long time, looking at clothes. And then, to my horror, she met a man. Tall, handsome, with dark hair. They hugged. Too long, too tightly. I felt the ground give way beneath me. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum. This wasn't a friend. This wasn't a colleague. This was someone else. I saw him gently caress her hand, saw them whisper and laugh. Emily's laugh, which used to be music to my ears, now sounded like a prelude to the apocalypse. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and walked away, feeling hollow, betrayed, crushed. I didn't know who this man was. I didn't know how long this had been going on. But I knew one thing. My life, my perfect canvas, was now torn to shreds. And the worst part was, I knew this was just the beginning. The next day, I woke up in a world that felt alien. The house, which had been my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. And Emily, the woman I loved more than anything, felt like a warden. Her touch, her voice, it all now filled me with disgust. I looked at her and saw only the lies that flowed from every gesture, every smile. I couldn't be silent anymore. I decided to act. I hired a private detective. It was the hardest decision of my life. I gave him instructions, described Emily, and all the while I felt as if I was betraying our love, our family. But there was no other way. I had to know the whole truth, no matter how terrible it was. A few days later, the detective sent me his report. I was sitting in my study when I received the email. My heart was pounding in my temples. My hands were shaking. I opened the file and started to read. Every word was like a knife plunging into me. The lover's name was Jason, the same one from the keychain engraving. He was an old friend of Emily's, whom she had met before me in college. They had broken up, but it turned out their feelings hadn't died. They had been meeting secretly for the last year and a half. They spent time in a rented apartment in another part of the city. The detective attached photos. In them, Emily and this Jason were sitting in a cafe, laughing, holding hands. In others, they were leaving that very apartment. In the last, most horrifying photo, they were embracing, and Jason was kissing her neck. I felt as if I had been ripped from my own body and then thrown onto the side of the road. It was humiliating. It was painful. It was monstrous. And that's when everything fell into place. I remembered how Emily had talked about needing to get into investments a few months ago. She said she wanted to invest money in a friend's startup. Naively, I believed her. But the detective's report stated that she had been transferring large sums of money to Jason's account. Little by little, in small amounts, so I wouldn't suspect anything. I realized that she had known about the inheritance even before I did. How? I didn't know. But I knew she had been preparing. She had been preparing to destroy my life, to take my children, my money, everything that was dear to me. I sat in the darkness, rereading the report again and again. I felt like I was going crazy. My Emily, the mother of my children, was a fraud. She had used me, used our love. Everything we had built was a lie. Our home, our children, our memories, everything was stained by her betrayal. I couldn't look at her face anymore, couldn't hear her voice. I was filled with rage, hatred, a desire for revenge. I wanted her to feel the same pain I was feeling now. Everything inside me was on fire. I looked at Emily, and she was a stranger to me. Her eyes, her smile, her voice, it was all a lie. But I couldn't play this game anymore. I needed the truth, the whole truth, and I decided to get it myself. I waited for the moment when she said she was going to her friends. She left the house, as usual, with a smile on her face and a certain nonchalance in her movements. I waited a few minutes and got in my car. I knew where she was going. I knew the address the detective had given me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I drove, with only one thought in my head. I had to see it with my own eyes. I pulled up to the house mentioned in the report. It was a small, cozy cottage in a quiet neighborhood, nothing like our home. There were no lights on inside, but I noticed her car in the driveway. I parked in the shadows and waited. My heart pounded in my chest like crazy. I didn't know what I was waiting for, and at the same time, I was terrified to find out. About an hour passed. The lights in the house never came on. I was starting to doubt myself when suddenly the front door opened. Standing on the doorstep were Emily and that same man, Jason. They were laughing, hugging, and I saw him gently kissing her neck. My world crumbled. My heart shattered into a million pieces. But there were no tears. There was only rage, icy and all-consuming. I got out of the car and walked towards them. They didn't notice me right away. Emily was in his arms, her eyes closed, whispering something into his ear. I cleared my throat. They jumped apart. Shock was on their faces. On Emily's face, it was horror. "David, what are you doing here?" she whispered. I couldn't speak. The words were stuck in my throat. I just stared at her, then shifted my gaze to Jason. He was tall, handsome, confident. He was my opposite, and he was with my wife. Emily was the first to recover. "David, it's not what you think," she said, but her voice was trembling. I didn't answer. I just watched. And then she started to talk, unexpectedly, but with a cold determination. "We need to talk. We need to get a divorce. I think we've grown too tired of each other. Our feelings have faded. We need to think about the children." The silence that hung in the air was heavier than any shout. She talked about dividing the assets, about how custody of the children should be hers, since I work too much. She talked about a fair division of our shared property. I stood and listened, and everything inside me was on fire. I looked at her cold face, and realized she'd been lying to me all this time. She didn't love me. She only loved the money. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and left. I didn't say a word. I just got in my car and drove away. I drove through the night city, not seeing the road, feeling nothing but a burning pain and a desire for revenge. I knew I wouldn't let her win. I wouldn't let her take my children. I would fight, and I would make her regret the day she betrayed me. The night turned into an endless torment. I came home but couldn't sleep. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost. Every corner, every object reminded me of our life, which had turned out to be a phantom. I looked at the sleeping Jack and Sophie and realized they were the only thing that mattered to me. And for their sake, I would fight. In the morning, I gathered all the documents I had: bank statements, the detective's report, photos. I drove to my old friend, who was a lawyer specializing in family law. His name was Michael. We hadn't seen each other in years, but I knew I could trust him. He listened to me without interrupting, with a cold calmness that I so desperately needed at that moment. When I finished, he looked at me with sympathy. "David, this is a very bad situation. She's thought of everything. But we'll fight. We'll do everything we can to make sure you get what's rightfully yours." He studied the documents. Their plan is obvious. She wants to portray you as an incompetent father who doesn't pay attention to the children and take custody from you. And then, through the court, take the money, using the fact of the divorce and custody of the children. I felt the rage wash over me again. "They wanted to destroy me," I whispered. "But you have something they don't," Michael said, smiling. "You have me, and you also have someone who can help us." He took out his phone and dialed a number. "David, remember my old acquaintance, Richard? He was our friend in college. He's now one of the best lawyers in the country, specializing in financial fraud and tax crimes. We'll work together." When we met with Richard, he was just as I remembered him: smart, calculating, and ruthless when it came to injustice. He studied the documents we gave him, and his eyes lit up. "This isn't just a divorce, David. It's fraud. We will act very carefully. First, we need to prove that she is not a reliable guardian. And then we will file a lawsuit for fraud so she cannot claim the inheritance. We will ruin their lives just as they tried to ruin yours." We began to act. I gathered all the evidence I could: letters, messages, photos. We provided the court with the detective's report, which clearly showed that Emily was lying. We proved that the money she was transferring to Jason was part of their plan. The court proceedings were long and agonizing, but we were ready. We were one step ahead. In the end, the court ruled. Custody of the children went to me, and Emily was stripped of her right to the inheritance. Furthermore, her actions were classified as fraud, and she faced criminal charges. Jason was also held accountable. I looked at her in the courtroom, at her pale face, her empty eyes. I saw her life falling apart. I didn't feel triumphant, only emptiness. I lost the woman I loved, but I found myself. And I found a new life, a life in which there was no more lies and betrayal. I focused on my children, my work, and new projects. My old friend Michael helped me with the moral and legal difficulties, and Richard helped me keep my fortune. 5 years passed. 5 years without her. 5 years during which I learned to live again. Emily's trial and her 5-year sentence for fraud and attempted theft were just the beginning. Yes, I got custody of the children and kept my money, but I lost something much more important: trust. My faith in love, in the person I considered my other half, was destroyed. In the first years, I was angry. I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her life to be as empty as mine. But over time, I realized that revenge wouldn't bring me peace. I focused on the children, on raising them, on creating a new, healthy environment. Jack and Sophie were growing up, and they were the meaning of my life. They were my light in the darkness. Emily got out of prison after 5 years. I thought that nightmare was over, but I was wrong. She started calling me. At first, they were calls with requests, with apologies. She said she had changed, that she was remorseful, but I didn't believe her. I remembered her cold face in court, her empty eyes. Then her requests turned into threats. She started saying that if I didn't let her see the children, she would sue me, that she would tell the children what a monster I was for depriving them of their mother. I didn't answer her calls. I blocked the numbers, but she would find new ones. She would appear at my work, wait for me at the children's school. I lived in constant fear. One day, I came home and saw that the door to my apartment was open. I walked in, and my heart stopped. Everything inside was turned over. Things were scattered. Photos of the children and my documents were on the floor. I realized it was her doing. She was trying to find some documents, some evidence to use against me. I immediately called the police, and she was arrested. At the court hearing, she again tried to blackmail me. But this time, I was ready. I provided the court with recordings of her threats, witness testimonies, and most importantly, the testimonies of Jack and Sophie. They told how she tried to turn them against me, how she used them to get what she wanted. The court sentenced her for disorderly conduct and threats, and she was forbidden from approaching me and my children. When I left the courthouse, I felt relief, but not triumph. I realized that she wasn't just a woman who had betrayed me. She was a sickness that was poisoning my life, and I had finally gotten rid of her. I returned home, where my children were waiting for me. I hugged them and realized that they were my true family. I realized that my life didn't end back then, 5 years ago. It had just begun. I lost a wife, I lost a part of my life, but I found myself. I found strength, courage, and most importantly, a new, real family. And this story isn't about revenge. It's a story about how one day $230 million fell on my head, and with them, a truth that helped me start a new life.